In 1655, a ship left Kinsale, Ireland, packed with human cargo destined for Barbados, but these weren't enslaved Africans. They were Irish, prisoners, rebels, and the desperately poor, deported by Oliver Cromwell's regime to work on Caribbean sugar plantations. Most people know about the Atlantic slave trade, but there's another forced migration that history buried. Between 1649 and 1660, tens of thousands of Irish were shipped to the Caribbean, not as colonizers or planters, but as indentured servants who died at catastrophic rates in the tropical heat. Today, if you venture into the remote corners of Barbados, past the resorts and colonial estates, you'll find something impossible. Communities with red-haired fishermen, graveyards filled with Irish surnames, and families speaking a Creole that sounds like the Caribbean filtered through Dublin. These aren't immigrants. They're the descendants of Irish deportees who arrived 400 years ago and never left. They're called Redlegs, and for centuries they've lived in isolation, marrying within their communities, preserving fragments of Irish culture while surviving in one of the harshest social positions imaginable. White in a world built on black slavery, but too poor to be treated as white. And over generations, something extraordinary happened. Irish blood mixed with African heritage, creating an Afro-Celtic identity that exists nowhere else on Earth. This is their story. A story written in DNA, preserved in surnames, and visible in faces that challenge everything we thought we knew about race, identity, and the Caribbean. The year is 1649. Oliver Cromwell's new model army has just conquered Ireland with brutal efficiency. The conquest isn't just military. It's designed to break Irish Catholic resistance permanently. Cromwell's solution is deportation on a massive scale. Between 1649 and 1660, an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 Irish men, women, and children are forcibly transported to the Caribbean. Some are prisoners of war, captured after battles like Drogheda and Wexford. Others are political rebels, Catholic priests, or anyone suspected of disloyalty. But many are simply poor. Orphans rounded up from the streets, families displaced by land confiscation, people who committed no crime except being Irish and Catholic in a country now ruled by English Protestants. They're shipped to Barbados, Montserrat, Antigua, St. Kitts, and Jamaica. The voyage across the Atlantic takes 6 to 8 weeks in conditions so horrific that mortality rates reach 30 to 40%. Those who survive arrive as indentured servants, bound by contracts that promise freedom after a set number of years, usually 5 to 7, in exchange for their labor on sugar plantations. But here's what most people don't understand about indentured servitude in the 1600s Caribbean. It wasn't slavery, but it was close. Indentured servants could be bought, sold, and traded. They worked the same brutal hours as enslaved Africans under the same tropical sun, in fields where malaria, yellow fever, and dysentery killed workers at staggering rates. Planters calculated that it was cheaper to work servants to death and buy new ones than to invest in their survival. The difference between indentured Irish and enslaved Africans was legal, not experiential, at least not initially. Irish servants had contracts with end dates. Their children were born free. They could, theoretically, own property and testify in court. But in practice, many died before their contracts expired. Those who survived found themselves at the bottom of a rigid racial hierarchy, socially above enslaved Africans, but economically and politically powerless. And here's the tragedy that historians often overlook. These weren't adventurers seeking fortune. They were survivors of a catastrophe that many historians now classify as genocidal. While genocide is a modern term, Cromwell's scorched earth campaign triggered a population collapse of 20 to 40%, a level of destruction that met the sociological criteria for genocide long before the word was even invented. The deportations were designed to solve what English authorities called the Irish problem, by removing the Irish from Ireland. For the individuals caught in the system, whether labeled as indentured servants, transportees, or prisoners, the experience was traumatic, violent, and often fatal. But some survived, and their descendants carry that survival in their genes. By the early 1700s, as sugar production intensified and the plantation economy boomed, Barbados became the most densely populated and profitable colony in the British Caribbean. Enslaved Africans now vastly outnumbered Europeans. The island's white population stratified sharply. At the top were wealthy planters who owned thousands of acres. Below them were merchants, overseers, and small landowners. And at the very bottom were the poor whites, many of Irish or Scottish descent, who had completed their indentures or were born to indentured parents but inherited no land or wealth. These poor whites were pushed to the island's least desirable areas, rocky cliffs and gullies on the windward coast where the soil was thin and farming nearly impossible. They became known as Redlegs, a term whose origins are debated. Some say it refers to sunburned legs exposed by poverty and lack of proper clothing. Others suggest it comes from Scottish and Irish Highland regiments whose soldiers wore red leggings. Regardless, the name stuck, and it carried stigma. Redlegs were social outcasts. They were mocked with derogatory terms like Eki-Beki and Poor Bakra, Creole insults suggesting they were degraded whites, failures in a society that equated whiteness with wealth and power. But recent archaeological work by Dr. Matthew Riley and his team from the Barbados Museum and Historical Society reveals a more complex picture. Excavations at Below Cliff and Pie Corner, two historic Redleg settlements, uncovered evidence of self-sufficient communities. These weren't simply impoverished squatters. They were fishermen, small-scale farmers, livestock keepers, and traders. They built homes, maintained family networks, and created a distinct subculture that preserved Irish and Scottish traditions, music, dance, and folk beliefs even as they adapted to Caribbean life. And here's the paradox. Despite their poverty and social marginalization, Redlegs played a crucial role in maintaining colonial power. They served in the militia, the armed force that suppressed slave rebellions and maintained order. The colonial government relied on poor whites as a buffer class, ensuring that even the most destitute European would side with the plantation system rather than make common cause with enslaved Africans. This was a deliberate strategy: keep poor whites just comfortable enough, just privileged enough to prevent cross-racial solidarity. It worked. For centuries, Redlegs remained isolated, endogamous, marrying within their own communities and avoiding integration with the Afro-Caribbean majority. But that isolation couldn't last forever. The 1830s brought a crisis. Britain abolished slavery throughout its Caribbean colonies in 1834. Emancipation transformed the labor market overnight. Formerly enslaved Africans, now free, demanded wages. Some left plantations entirely, establishing independent villages and small farms. The plantation economy struggled, and Barbados, already overcrowded, faced economic collapse. For Redlegs, this was catastrophic. Their marginal existence depended on occasional wage labor, fishing, and subsistence farming. As competition for work intensified, many faced starvation. The colonial government offered a solution: emigration. In the 1840s and 1850s, hundreds of Redleg families were recruited to migrate to other Caribbean islands where labor was still in demand. St. Vincent and Grenada became the primary destinations. The contrast between these two settlements tells you everything about how environment shapes community survival. In Grenada, Redleg families were settled at Mount Moritz, a lush highland area with fertile volcanic soil. They thrived. They established farms, grew vegetables, raised livestock, and created a vibrant village economy. Mount Moritz became a community where Irish surnames Murphy, O'Brien, Ryan, and Byrne mixed with Afro-Caribbean neighbors. Cultural exchange was inevitable. Irish folk traditions blended with African influences. Music, food, and language created something new, a creolized Afro-Celtic identity. But in St. Vincent, the story was different. Redleg families were settled at Dorsetshire Hill, a marginal area with poor soil and limited resources. They struggled. Many remained isolated, clinging to their identity as distinct from the Afro-Caribbean majority. Integration happened slowly, over generations, through intermarriage and economic necessity. By the late 1900s, most descendants had integrated fully into the broader St. Vincentian population, but traces remained: surnames, family stories, and DNA. Today, genetic testing reveals hidden Irish ancestry in families who had no idea their great-great-grandparents came from Barbados, much less Ireland. The Redleg diaspora scattered across the Caribbean, but the genes, the surnames, and fragments of culture survived. But if you want to see where Irish Caribbean identity is most alive, you have to go to Montserrat. This small volcanic island, just 16 kilometers long, is called the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. And it's not just a nickname. Irish influence is everywhere. The island's flag features a woman playing an Irish harp. The passport stamp is a shamrock. St. Patrick's Day is a national holiday. And when you hear Montserratian Creole, or the Bajan accent of Barbados, you're hearing a 400-year-old ghost. While the grammar is rooted in West African languages like Igbo and Fon, the accent carries a distinct Irish rhoticity, that hard, rolling R, and specific vowel shifts that trace directly back to Hiberno-English. It is the sound of two worlds colliding and refusing to let go. But Montserrat's Irish story is different from Barbados. Here, Irish Catholics weren't just laborers, they were planters, landowners, and slaveholders. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, Irish Catholics fleeing religious persecution in other colonies settled in Montserrat. They established estates, bought enslaved Africans, and became part of the planter class. This created a unique dynamic. Unlike most Caribbean colonies where whiteness meant Protestant English power, Montserrat had a white Catholic elite who shared some cultural and religious affinity with enslaved Africans, many of whom were also baptized Catholic. This doesn't mean the system was any less brutal. Slavery on Montserrat was as violent and exploitative as anywhere else. But the cultural mixing was deeper and more complex. Irish planters spoke Irish Gaelic alongside English. Enslaved Africans learned Irish words and phrases. Music and dance traditions blended. The result was a creolized culture that incorporated Irish, African, and Caribbean elements in ways that still persist today. The most dramatic event in Montserrat's history came on St. Patrick's Day, 1768. Enslaved Africans on the island planned a major rebellion, choosing the holiday deliberately because they knew Irish planters would be drinking and distracted. The plot was discovered before it could be fully executed, and the leaders were executed. But the rebellion became a symbol. Today, St. Patrick's Day in Montserrat commemorates both Irish heritage and the resistance of enslaved Africans. It's a holiday that refuses to fit into simple categories, Irish or African. It's both. And that duality defines Montserrat's identity. Walk through Montserrat today and you'll meet Afro-Caribbean people with surnames like O'Gara, Mead, Ryan, and Daly. You'll taste goat water, the national dish, a stew that combines African cooking techniques with Irish ingredients and spices. You'll hear fife and drum music, a fusion of Irish reels and African rhythms. And if you ask people about their identity, they'll tell you they're Montserratian, but many will also tell you they're Irish, not metaphorically, literally. Their ancestors were Irish, and that heritage matters. It's celebrated in festivals, preserved in music, and passed down through families. Montserrat is proof that identity doesn't have to be pure. It can be layered, complex, and proudly hybrid. So here's the question that fascinates geneticists. Why do some Caribbean families still have red hair, freckles, and light-colored eyes after nearly 400 years? Why haven't these traits disappeared through admixture with the Afro-Caribbean majority? The answer is in the genetics, and it tells us something profound about how isolated populations evolve. When a small group of people, like the Redlegs, remains genetically isolated through endogamy, marrying only within the community, they experience what's called a founder effect. Rare traits that might disappear in a large, diverse population can become common in a small, isolated one. Red hair is caused by mutations in the MC1R gene. It's recessive, meaning both parents need to carry the variant for the trait to appear. In a large, genetically diverse population, red hair is rare, but in a small, isolated community where everyone carries the variant, it can persist at high frequencies for generations. Dr. Jada Ben-Torres, a geneticist at Vanderbilt University, has spent years studying Caribbean populations with European ancestry. Her work on the ICARA project, the island community's African-American roots ancestry, used genetic testing to trace hidden ancestry in Caribbean populations. What she found in Barbados and other islands was striking. Many Afro-Caribbean families carry significant European ancestry, often Irish or Scottish, that they weren't aware of. This ancestry appears in both Y chromosome DNA, inherited from fathers, and mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers. Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, the most common paternal lineage in Ireland, shows up in Caribbean populations at frequencies far higher than expected. This means Irish men fathered children with African and Afro-Caribbean women, and those children's descendants are alive today. Similarly, European mitochondrial haplogroups, the maternal lineages, appear in Afro-Caribbean families, indicating Irish or Scottish. Women also had children in the Caribbean, and their maternal lines persisted. But the most fascinating findings come from autosomal DNA, the genetic material inherited from both parents. Modern DNA testing reveals that many Afro-Caribbean people carry 10 to 20% European ancestry, much of it Irish or British. For families with red leg heritage, that percentage can be higher, 40 to 60% European. And when those families take DNA tests through services like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, they're often shocked to discover they have genetic cousins in Ireland, direct descendants of the same families who were deported to the Caribbean in the 1600s. This is history written in DNA. It's proof that the Irish deportations weren't just a historical footnote. They created genetic legacies that persist today, visible in faces, surnames, and chromosomes. By the late 1900s, most Redleg communities in Barbados had disappeared. Families either emigrated or integrated into the broader Afro-Caribbean society through intermarriage and economic mobility. The below Cliff and Pie Corner enclaves, once home to hundreds of Redleg families, are now mostly gone. The culture that preserved Irish folk songs, dances, and traditions has faded, but the genes remain. Modern Barbadians with Irish surnames often have no idea their ancestors were Redlegs. They identify as Afro-Caribbean, their skin is brown, their culture is Bajan, but when they take DNA tests, they discover unexpected European ancestry, and it traces back to Ireland. In Grenada, Mount Moritz is different. The village still exists, and it's still identifiable as a place with Irish heritage. Families celebrate their ancestry. They preserve stories of migration from Barbados. They maintain connections to Irish culture through festivals and food. And they integrate fully into Grenadian society while also holding on to something distinct, a pride in being Afro-Celtic. And Montserrat, devastated by volcanic eruptions in the 1990s that buried much of the island, still celebrates its Irish heritage fiercely. The population, mostly relocated to the UK and other Caribbean islands, maintains Montserratian identity as inherently Irish and African, a fusion that defines them. For descendants exploring their roots through genetic genealogy, the discoveries can be shocking. A Jamaican woman discovers her great-great-grandmother was a Redleg from Barbados. A Grenadian man finds genetic cousins in County Cork. A Montserratian traces her surname back to a 17th century Irish Catholic planter. These aren't just curiosities, they're proof that history lives in our DNA, that migrations and mixings from centuries ago still shape who we are today. The Caribbean we think we know, divided into black and white, colonizer and colonized, is too simple. The real Caribbean is creolized, mixed, and layered with histories that don't fit neat categories. If you found this story fascinating, share it with anyone curious about hidden histories that genetics is revealing. Have you ever discovered unexpected ancestry in your DNA results? Do you think the distinction between indentured servitude and slavery matters? Or is it the suffering that defines the experience? And if you have Irish or Caribbean ancestry, have you explored the possibility that your family history might include both? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The Irish in the Caribbean didn't just survive. They became part of the fabric of a new world. Their genes, their names, and their culture woven into societies that are still discovering what that means. Their story isn't over. It's still being written in the DNA of every descendant who takes a test and finds Ireland where they didn't expect it. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.